Nissuch hamayim keitzad. How is the pouring of the water, the drawing of the water? Sloiches shel zohov. Machazekas shloishes lugim. Hoye memalim na shiloach. A jug which would contain 3 lug would be filled from the shiloach. So now we have water would be drawn from the shiloach pool, and that would be brought to the Beis Hamikdash and be poured on the Mizbeach. Let's go and understand what's involved over here. Now here you have a picture of Yerusholayim, the topography of Yerusholayim in the times of the base of Bayis Rishon. And what we're seeing here is, if you see the rectangle in the middle here, that rectangle is what's now known as Temple Mount, which measures 250 meters wide and 500 meters from north to south. And Yerushalayim, the city of Yerushalayim, was just that little bit that beneath it. If you think of where I'm pointing with the arrow, just this little bit beneath, which means that the whole of Yerushalayim was all of about 500 meters. And that was the entire Yerushalayim in the time of Bayis Rishon. And if you look at the topography, you'll realize how strong and impenetrable it is as a city, because any enemy which would want to enter the city would have to go uphill. As you see, it's surrounded by the ravines on either side. To the east, you have Nahal Kidron, and to the west, you've got the Gai or Gai Ben Hinoim. So there were deep ravines on either side, and so it was really a very, very strong, very fortified place. The Achilles heel, the weak point though, is that there's no natural water. Yerushalayim has no rivers in it. The closest to having a natural source of water is the Shiloach. And now the Shiloach, here's the arrow. Right, the Shiloach is where the arrow is pointing over here. The Shiloach is going to be synonymous with the word Gichon. There's a Mayan Gichon. There's a spring called the Gichon Spring, and that spring, it's the word Gichon can mean kicks forth, but that spring then trickles down to a pool called the Shiloach or Brechas Shiloach. If any of you have ever been to Eretz Yisrael and you go out of the Kosel Maravi, which that is, again, where's my arrow? The western wall of this compound, which we just have this rectangle. So if you go to if you go out of the Kosel Maravi, then you'd come to the bus, and you would, the bus goes more to the west, and if instead of going west when you come out of the coastal, you go about 50 yards to eastwards, to your left rather than to your right, there you'll see the excavations called Ir David, fascinating excavations where you see the original Yerushalayim, which is south of Temple Mount. Whereas the contemporary, the Yerushalayim, is very much expanded to the north of the Temple Mount and a little bit to the west. So, for example, where you have what's called the Ir Atika, where you have the Chabad Tzemach Tzedek Shul, that's in the expanded Yerushalayim, which we'll come to in a moment. I mean, it's not part of the original Yerushalayim. The original Yerushalayim was only south, that sliver, south of Temple Mount. That was the original Yerushalayim, as it says in the Pasuk in Yechezkel, K'mivnei Ir Minegev. And as I said, the weak point of Yerushalayim, it could be, it was very strong, but it did not have natural water. And the only source of natural water is primary source of natural water is the Shiloach. The Shiloach is just that little bit outside, and it's at the bottom of the hill. At the bottom of that, sheer drop. And because of this, this was the exposure to the enemy. Because if the enemy would occupy the waters of the Shiloach, then the people inside had no water to drink, and that's there to bring them to their knees. So actually, they built very strong fortifications around the Shiloach, so that an enemy who would besiege the city would not be able to cut off their water supply. So that was their vulnerable point. Let's go on. Well, this is the Shiloach, and this is the source of water from which the water was drawn on Sukkot. Now here's your layout of the Beis HaMikdash, and here the layout of Har HaBayis, and towards the south, as you see, there's the large space there. And if my arrow is going to work here now, for the older ones in this forum might appreciate the name Shar Hamayim being called the Watergate. So you have here the south entrance. Oh, here I've got the arrow. That way I'm pointing to with the arrow, that is the Shar Hamayim, and they would go down. Well, they'd go down through these outer gates, which I think was Shar Shushon, go to the south, go down to the Shiloach, but then they would come back through those gates, through the southern gates, and come through the Shar Hamayim, and there they would bring the water to the Mizbeach. So that's the significance of this. It's called Shar Hamayim because that's where the water was brought for pouring on the Mizbeach. Beautiful. Okay, so now we know that we have about, let's say, about 500 meters south of the Beis HaMikdash, there is a pool called the Shiloach. That's where the water was drawn, and it was brought to the Har HaBayis, which is uphill, as well as being north. It was that much higher up. Okay. Now here I've got a fascinating story. This story is written in the Sefer Shem HaGdolim. Shem HaGdolim was written by the Chidah. His full name was Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai, and he has like a bibliographical lexicon of Gdolim of throughout the generations, and he, under the heading of Reb Chaim Vital. So Reb Chaim Vital is the primary pupil of the Arizal, so that puts him about 400 something years ago, and he's the one who transcribes the teachings of the Arizal. There were others also, but he's the most recognized. The majority of the teachings of the Arizal which we have are from the writings of Reb Chaim Vital. After the Arizal passed away, so I'm going to go through this story. Since I've told you that there was some incident which caused Reb Chaim Vital to move to Damascus. Many people asked me, to please tell us the story. What made Reb Chaim Vital move to Damascus? Although generally I don't like to write stories in my in this book called Shem HaGdolim, but here I'm going to reveal to you what I've heard from Rabboni, the elder Rabbonim in Yerusholayim. Now, the Chidah, just to give you a picture, he lived about the time of the Alter Rebbe, a little bit earlier perhaps, and he's telling us a story which happened 150 years before his time, possibly. So he says like this: it's known that Chizkiyahu, King Hamelech, Alav Shalom, the king of King Chizkiyahu, he was very worried about Sancherev. Sancherev was the king of Assyria, and he was a very powerful king, and he had laid his eyes also on conquering Yerusholayim. And because of the fear of this, Chizkiyahu had blocked the waters of the Gichon. As I said, the Gichon is the water source for the Shiloach. Now, Ad Hayom, till this very day, says the Chidah, every Friday in the afternoon, Friday afternoon, the gates of Yerushalayim are closed because the Muslims, the Ishmaelim, they're going to the mosque, and which is the place of the Mikdash, and basically it becomes very quiet. and therefore they would close the gates. And there's a particular place which is, you can hear where there's water flowing underneath the ground. Reb Chaim Vital, this is probably after the Arizal had passed away, obviously. Reb Chaim Vital is living in Yerusholayim. At that time came a very powerful governor by the name of Abu Saifin, and he knows the history that there's a Jewish king hundreds and hundreds of years earlier who had blocked the waters of the Gichon. And he asks the people in Yerushalayim, he had come, I think, from Baghdad, this Abu Saifin, and he asks, does anyone know how to reveal those waters? So the goyim there in Yerushalayim said there's one wise man, a Jewish Chochem, and his name is Reb Chaim Vital. He for sure knows how to open that, to reveal those waters. So Abu Saifin sends a summons to Reb Chaim Vital, and he says, I decree upon you that I'm going up to the mosque. You open up that water, which has been blocked by your king, and it's needed for the city, and you must open it. If you don't open that water, your blood is on your head. In other words, your life is in danger. Okay, so now Abu Saifin has decreed upon Reb Chaim Vital to use whatever powers he has to uncover those waters. Reb Chaim Vital, second column, uses Kfitzes Haderech. On that Friday afternoon, he moves to Damascus, to Damascus. There's a minhag of Feine Yidden to have a rest on Friday afternoon. It might be good for other people also. You get less nervous when Shabbos comes in. But Reb Chaim Vital lies down for a rest on Friday afternoon. And his Rebbe, the Arizal, comes to him in the dream. And he says, look at those words, Hiskalto asoy, you did a foolish act. Because this Abu Saifin, he is a Gilgul of Sancherev. And the name Abu Saifin, which is an Arabic word, well, means the father of the sword. Because the word, as you know, also in Gemara, we have the word Saif, is a knife. So Abu Saifin means the same as the word Sancherev, the father of the sword. You have a spark of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. And you had now the opportunity to rectify that which Chizkiyahu had blocked the waters of the Gichon. You had the opportunity to correct this. Now, in the footnote, you can see in a little square at the bottom, I've pointed out that not only does Abu Saifin and Sancherev share the same name, but actually Chizkiyahu is gematria 130, and Chaim Vital is also 130. So there's a neshama connection between these two pairs on the Kedusha and the opposite. And Arizal says to him, reminds him, Shaloi birotzi chachomim osa Chizkiyahu HaMelech. That which Chizkiyahu blocked the waters of the Gichon was Shaloi b'rtzon chachomim, as the Mishnah says, it's for Shaloi hoidulai. He wasn't praised for this. If you would have opened the waters of the Gichon for Abu Saifin, this would have been a moment for the opening for the Geula. Amazing stuff. So now Reb Chaim Vital apologizes to his Rebbe in his dream, and he says that to the Arizal, I didn't want to use holy names of the Eibishter to expose the water for Abu Saifin. Says the Arizal, but yeah, how did you get here to Damascus? For that, you did manage to use Shemus Kedoshim. If you use Shemus Kedoshim to transport yourself on a Friday afternoon from Yerushalayim to Damascus, you should have also used Shemus Kedoshim to expose the water for Abu Saifin, and that would have been a tikkun, Kiddush Hashem, the tikkun Godel. So Reb Chaim Vital says, the afternoon is still young, I can go back. So the Arizal says, too late. Abu Chodev Shaita v'lab zimnehu. Amazing, amazing story. And so we have here this situation where Chizkiyahu blocks the waters of the Gichon, and it seems such a wrong move, and to the point that hundreds and hundreds of years later, it's still waiting for a tikkun. And so I want to understand what's going on here. Okay. So now, the drasha I'm sharing with you is published in the Sefer Nesivim B'Sdei HaShlichus, volume 2. But I had a grus from the Rebbe. I want to just bring out that in the way I was brought up, every Friday between Mincha and Ma'ariv, we learn the Sikha which comes out for that Shabbos. Or earlier times we see last week's Sikha, but we always learn by Mincha and Ma'ariv. And so now, just this week, Shabbos Chalamoid Sukkos, as you can see here, it was published in honor of this Shabbos, this part of the first days of Sukkot, was published as Sikha from Tovshin Lamed Daled. To refresh your memories, Tovshin Lamed Daled was the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War, 1973. So it was the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War. Fascinatingly, the Rebbe on Vov Tishri, before the outbreak of the war, has a Farbrengen. It is his mother's yard site. And this Farbrengen, he makes a siyum on Maseches Chala, which is quite unusual. It wasn't on Yerusholayim. It was just on the Mishnayos Chala, which is quite unusual to make a siyum on a Masechta of Mishnayos, but that's not the point. The point is that the last line of Maseches Chala talks about people bringing korbanos or other sacred stuff from out of the country into Eretz Yisrael. And then it talks about from an area called Surya. Surya is where approximately the Golden Heights is, around that area, where Syria is now, I believe. And in the times of Bayis Rishon, that area had a Kedusha where the girls of Bnei Reuven were there. So it has even in Bayis Sheni, it didn't have the full Kedusha, but it has a semi-Kedusha. And the Mishnah says there, Hakoine Soda Besurya, Kakoine Beparvo Shebirushalayim. One who buys a plot of land in Surya is as if he had bought a plot of land in a suburb of Yerushalayim. Now the Rebbe said before the war broke out. Then the war breaks out, and the Rebbe is pushing that the forces of Tzahal should surge forward and conquer Damascus, even just for a couple of days, just to really demoralize the Tzad Shekeneged, the Syrian power. And so now the Rebbe. So that was, as I say, before Yom Kippur, the Rebbe just makes an innocuous siyum on Maseches Chala, which talks about Syria. Afterwards, he follows up, and he talks all about the importance of the significance of Syria in Halacha, and he says he's going to draw it from a Medrash, and he quotes the pasuk from Zechariah, Damesek Menuchosoi, Chadroch. Mashiach is going to, that Yisrael is going to, Asido Yisrael Shetispashet ad Damesek, that Yisrael is going to reach, in Mashiach's time is going to reach till Damesek. That's in the Sikha. So, I spoke to Rabbi Shochet. I said, I'm going to speak about this topic, but here I see in the Sikha that Rebbe is talking all about Yerushalayim and Damascus, and here I have a story which is the focal point of my talk today, is about Reb Chaim Vital going from Yerushalayim to Damascus. So now, here's just one part of the Sikha, and where he quotes here from the Kisvei Arizal. And he points out how Yerushalayim is the Bechina of Leo and Mikdosh and Damesek. He points out that Mikdosh and Damesek share the same letters. And in a sense, it looks like Damascus is the Achoraim of, it's like the other end, it's the counterpart in a sense, in a negative sense of Yerushalayim. So that all makes it so much more interesting. So I'm just saying that my gris, my kind of nod and wink from the Rebbe about this talk. This week was published this word of the Rebbe, where he quotes from the Arizal, the significance of Damascus vis-a-vis Yerushalayim. And so coming back to our topic, the irony that Chaim Vital runs away from Yerushalayim next to the Mikdosh and runs away to Damascus. But meanwhile, we're still struggling with this question. of what was so inappropriate with the act of Chizkiyahu. Now, this is the Mishnah now in Psochim, and I've missed out the word Shisha because it's on the other page. Shisha Dvorim Osa Chizkiyahu HaMelech. There were 6 significant acts done by Chizkiyahu. Al Shloisha Hoiduloi, 3 he was praised for. But Al Shloisha Loi Hoiduloi, to save time, we'll go to the second paragraph. Al Shloisha Loi Hoiduloi, 3 acts he was not praised for. One is that he cut off the doors of the Heichal, and he sent them as a gift or a bribe to Melech Ashur, that's Sancheriv. V'loi hoiduloi, they weren't happy with that. Sosa me gichon elyon, v'loi hoiduloi, he blocked the waters of the gichon, and he wasn't praised for that. And the third thing was he expanded, he made a Iber Yora, he made a leap year in Nisan, b'Nisan v'loi hoiduloi. So here we have this idea that this information at least, that he blocked the waters of the Gichon, and I understand, you take a piece of the Heichal and send it off as a gift to Melech Ashur, I can understand. What was so terrible about blocking the Mei Gichon Ha'elyon? And here we have this posuk in Divrei Hayomim. So we have how the upper quote is how Vayivoatzim Sorov v'Giboirov. He is worried that Sancheriv is coming. That's the posuk base. Sancheriv is coming, and he wants to cut off a water supply from the enemy. He doesn't want to give them water, or he wants to salvage the water for himself. So he takes counsel with his warriors and his ministers to block the waters, the Mayonos, outside the city via Azru, and they seem to agree with him. And yet, here we're seeing in the specifically of the Megichon that loy hoiduloi. So here it says vayazru. They seem to be in coordination about this, but the other springs maybe yes. But the Megichon was something which we see in the Mishnah of loy hoiduloi. So to explain a little bit more the question. So here you have an artist impression of Yerusholayim in the time of Chizkiyahu. As you can see to the right, which is the north, you can see the Temple Mount, and then you see this narrow sliver, which is the original Yerusholayim. If you can see where I'm pointing with the arrow, you can see the fortifications around the Shiloach, and then we've got a whole bunch of housing on the other side, on the far side. What happened? Well, as we know that Sancheriv was responsible for exiling the Aseres HaShvatim. He exiled the majority of the Jewish inhabitants of the north of Eretz Yisrael. There were refugees who managed to escape that transfer, that human transfer, and many of them converged on Yerushalayim. But there was no space in the original Yerushalayim. It's tiny, as you understand now. So they converged on the mountain, which was adjacent to Yerushalayim, on the other side of the ravine. And so now, in the times of Chizkiyahu, they extended the fortifications of Yerushalayim to incorporate the expanded city, which is to the west. So where you have now what we call Ir Atika, the old city, that's the expansion to absorb those refugees. That was an expansion in the times of Chizkiyahu. Now, you understand, I said before that the weak point of Yerushalayim is the water supply. Why couldn't they get the Shiloach inside? Very simple, because the Yerushalayim is on a mountain. How do you get the water on the outside? How do you get it into the city? It's not possible. So it was outside that now, but now that the city has expanded, there's a solution. You can make a tunnel along the side of the city and somehow bring the water downhill into the city. Because as you understand, the expanded city now has a ravine in the middle. So you can have the water flow downhill and it's going to be within the city. So now this was a brilliant idea, if you think about it. And we know that there was a project done in the times of Chizkiyahu to divert the waters of the Shiloach, the Gichon, to divert them into the city. That this famous inscription, which is from which was discovered you see about 1880, And the inscription reads that about the drilling of the hole, and the axes met one another within 3 amos. They could hear one another, and it came to a point where the axes beat one another, and the waters are going from the Shiloach, and they are flowing down. This inscription was found, as I say, in 1880. It apparently still exists, and this is describing the project which was undertaken by Chizkiah to divert the waters of the Shiloach, and that they should be within the city. So now, it's amazing. You have your weak point is that your water is outside the city, and that's a weak point for yourself, and that's going to provide water for your enemy. So what do? So you direct the water to within the city. It's going to be salvaging and securing your own people. It's going to be depriving the enemy of having a water supply. So that's going to make them at a disadvantage to besiege your city. And he's criticized, and to the point that hundreds of years later you have to have a ticker for this. And what's going on here? What was so terrible about the blocking of the water of the Gichon? Question clear? Okay, so let's move on. So now, a few years ago, I was learning a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, and I learned it again this morning in the Sidurim Dach. Because I know from last session, I have a weakness for Sidurim. So I have a geschmack in learning the Sidurim Dach. So look at this statement. It talks about V'shavtem mayim b'sos. He says, B'shas hashiva mimayon hanikro shiloach, that they celebrated drawing water from the Shiloach pool, hayoytzi mi beis kodesh kadoshim, that the waters of the Shiloach come from the Kodesh Kadoshim. I was thrown by this, because as you've seen, the Shiloach is down south, east. The Kodesh Kadoshim is towards the north of this. And here the Alter Rebbe throws this, and now there's a new print, a new edition of the Alter Rebbe Siddur, which was published last year, or was it 2 years ago? Very, very good piece of work, fascinating. He gives a couple of sources, but this is a whole new dimension, that we're saying that the waters of the Shiloach are coming from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, I'm going to give a little bit more backing to this, but whilst I'm turning the pages, I want to tell you that contemporary, and I have it noted in the Sefer, that contemporary scholars have evidence of this, because there are some pools which they right in the shuk, like the shuk right near the Kaisel, and they found some kind of, I don't know what the word is, infection in the waters over there, and they found the same microbe, the same infection in the waters of the Shiloach pool. So they in other words, they corroborated, not that they saw this in the Maimer, but they corroborated that there is an underground connection between the waters which are minimal, but near Har Habayis, and the waters down the Shiloach. Now, here we have, at the top of the sheet, of this page, we have here part of Yechezkel. Now, Yechezkel is the time of between the two Beit Mikdashes, and he has a guided tour from a Malach to view the new Beis Hamikdash. And he says, I was taken to the north, and then, and I came to the outer gate. I see water. The word mefakim is an unusual word. It's related to the word pach, which means a bottle. Water like the thickness of a bottle. A flow of water was flowing. Now, that's the pasuk in Yechezkel, and now we have the Mishnah in Midas, which we learn every year during the 3 weeks, especially, Shar HaMayim, the water gate. Why is it called the water gate? Because that was, as we described earlier, that was there where the gate, so on the south, and when they brought the water from the Shiloach, on Sukkot, they would bring the jug of water through that gate. That's why it was called Shar HaMayim. Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer says, I've got another point why it's called Shar HaMayim. Boy HaMayim Mefakim Vasidin Liyos Yoitzim Mitachas Miftan Habayis. We know that there's also a nevuah which talks about a tiny rivulet flowing out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and it's getting wider and wider. Now that nevuah is talking about Yemosha Moshiach. And there's different gersos in this Mishnah. Some say, Mayim, boy HaMayim HaMefakim Asidim Liyos. That's the gersos of the Rambam. At any rate, the Eliezer ben Yaakov is attributing the name Shar HaMayim, that water would come out of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There was a tiny river, and it would come out under the threshold of the Beis HaMikdash, this flow of water, which is coming down, and it's flowing out of that water gate of Shar HaMayim. So here we have documented that there is a flow of water from the Beis HaMikdash out of the Shar HaMayim. But then there's a bit of a leap here to say that the water coming out of the Beis HaMikdash somehow finds its way down to the Gichoy and down to the Shiloach. But that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. Okay. And as I say, in the new edition of the Siddur, they give further evidence, further sources to this. Alter Rebbe says it as a known fact that the waters of the Shiloach originate from the Mokim HaMikdash, from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Okay, so now this is giving us a little bit more of an insight of the significance of the water of the Shiloach. And now I hear this is a medrash which is quoted probably hundreds of times in Chassidus. I did a search yesterday on the Oitza HaChochma. It came up probably about 100 times in Chabad Chassidus alone. Now, on the second day of creation, Hashem divided the waters, the upper waters and the lower waters. And we have this phrase, Mayim tachtoinim boichim. The lower waters are crying. The upper waters are closer to Hashem. The Mayim tachtoinim boichim anan be'inen lemeve kami malka. The lower waters are crying, we want to be closer to Hashem. And Hashem says to them, you're going to have two opportunities. One is, as first line you can see, likori b'melach. Every korban has to have salt. Salt comes from the seas. So the representation of the sea, of the mayim tachtonim, will be in the salt added to every korban. And then b'nisuch hamayim b'chag, the yearning of the mayim tachtonim will be addressed when it comes Sukkos, and the waters, the mayim tachtonim, are able to be poured on the mizbeach. So this is now now this becomes very, very interesting. What's happened over here in the light of the Alter Rebbe's Maimer? We have here waters coming from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. They're going down to the Shiloach. Then those waters are brought back and they're poured on the Mizbeach. It's very powerful stuff. So now we can appreciate that the power of these waters, that they're coming from Mokim Kodesh. Now here, I'm going to share with you another fascinating piece of information. We have a sefer called Megala Amukus. Megala Amukus was a Baal Ruach HaKodesh, Reb Nosson Shapira. Fascinating stuff. It's just every two lines is another ptzatza, as they say. So he says that Sancherev is a Gilgul of Nimrod. And Nimrod was the time where there was the Tower of Babel and everyone was scattered. And Sancherev, as we know, Sancherev made a confusion where he moved nations, transferred them from place to place. So he is a Gilgul of Sancherev. And Sancherev is a king of Ashur. And in the time we have there, in the time of the Parshas Haflaga, Min Ha'aretz Hahi Yotze Ashur. So Nimrod is associated with Assyria, Sancherev, the king of Assyria. So we have here Sancherev as a repeat soul of Nimrod. Who is the opposite of Nimrod? We have Avraham. So this is still from Reb Nosson Shapira in the Megala Amukus. Hine hoya Avraham Bimei Nimrod, k'mei Chizkiah, bimei Sancheiriv. That Avram he's kind of this kedusha against Nimrod, like Chizkiah was in the time of Sancheiriv. V'chein Moshiach bimei Goig, and then you have Moshiach who has his counterpart in Klippe is in Goig, and the Moshiach is to vanquish, to conquer Goig. So now we're getting a little bit closer. So Avram Avinu had to overpower Nimrod, and he didn't manage all the way. And Chizkiah was now given the opportunity to overcome Sancheiriv, which he failed to do. So let's take a look back in the battle of Avram vis-a-vis Nimrod. It says, because Nimrod also becomes Amrophel, he's one of the kings who fought against Sodom and Amorah in the time when Avram went to save in Lot. And it says, Avram, he gets together his lads and he chases after them 318 people, and says it was Eliezer, Vayirdoif ad Don. He chases them up till dawn. And then it goes on the next pasuk, and he managed to chase them by Yudafim ad Choivo Asher Mismoile Damasek. He chases and he comes to Choivo, to the left of Damascus, and that's where Avram had to stop chasing them. So Rashi in the Chumash over there says, why did he stop at dawn? Because in years later there would be Yerovon would put up a golden calf in Shomron and in Don. So Don was a place where Yidden were going to stumble with Avodah Zarah. So Avram comes to Don, he can't go further because of the sins of the future in Don. And then the words Choivo makes sense. The sin, till the sin, he couldn't go further. And then Damasek, look at that. Damasek comes in. And what's the difference between Mikdosh and Damasek? One's got a shin and one's got a sin. The shin, the dot is on the right, and the sin, the dot is on the left. Mismoil le Damasek. It's on the left side. That's the Damasek is in this left side, which is in Klippe. And he came to that place, Don, Damasek. That was Avram's, that was his weak point. He couldn't go any further. He couldn't chase Nimrod. And that's where he had to give up in the chase. Now let's come now to Chizkiah. What's his relationship to Don? So now it says in the times of Chizkiah, he will be able to throw off the yoke of his enemies. And the chubal oil, the last sentence, the chubal oil mipnei shaman. The yoke will be thrown off, will be cast off because of the oil. So let's take a look at the Gemara Sanhedrin. So, Omri Bitzchok Navcha, Chubal oil shall Sancheiriv. The yoke of Sancheiriv was cast off because of the oil of Chizkiyahu, because of the oil which was burning in the shuls, in the bottom midrashes. Me also. What did Chizkiyahu do? It says the whole thing. He put a cherev at the door of the medrash, and he says, "Whoever doesn't know Torah, you doke becherev." And the punchline, Bodku midon v'ad Beersheva. They searched and they examined from Don in the north to Beersheba in the south. V'leimotzu am ha'oretz. Migeves v'ad Antifris, v'leimotzu tinik v'tinoikes ish v'isha. They could not find anyone, child, young, old, ignorant. Shalehoya bekin behichus tume v'tara. There was a tremendous knowledge of Torah, of purity, all the way till Don. So whereas, look at that. Whereas Avram had to halt by dawn because of the sins which were done were to be done in the future, in the times of the Bayis Rishon, in the earlier times. But in the time of Chizkiyahu, he had spread the Torah and Yedias HaTorah in a way that he was Masakin. The weakness of dawn had been rectified by Chizkiyahu. If that's the case, then the time was ripe for him to pick up where Avram hadn't managed to neutralize Nimrod. Here, he did have the ability to neutralize Sancheiriv. How so? Had he left those waters, those powerful waters of the coming out from the Kodesh HaKadoshim at the Shiloach, had he left them outside, had Sancheriv come and drunk from those waters, that would be his birur. He would be having, there was such a power of Kedusha, that would be the Aschalta de Geula, as mentioned by the Chida. What is that? What is that? Now, just to wind up. Then we have now, so then that was happening in the time of, so there was Avram vis-a-vis Nimrod. Then we had, as we saw in the Gala Amukos, we have Chizkiah vis-a-vis Sancheriv. Then we have the Arizal telling Reb Chaim Vital, and this is again, this is my conjecture, that there'd been such a spread of Kedusha in the times of the Arizal that the time was ripe that you, Chaim Vital, who is a Gilgul of Chizkiah, you had the ability to reveal those waters to Abu Saifin, who's a Gilgul of Sancheriv, who is a Gilgul of Nimrod, and you would have been Aschal to the Geula. Unfortunately, that didn't materialize then either. But that's just a timeline, describing a timeline, Nefesh timeline. But one last thought on this. There are the areas which are meant to be discrete. Yiddishkeit, there are areas that are meant to be discrete. And Chizkiyahu was actually criticized for having opened the Sefer Torah to show the Sefer Torah to Sancheriv Melech Ashur. And the expression is Ba'adei Kavshe D'Rachmana Lo Malach. There are inyonim which are meant to be bitsnius, so they're meant to be inside. On the other hand, there are areas which are dafka on the outside, like the Shiloach is on the outside. There are areas of Yiddishkeit which are dafka on the outside, and there are areas of our chinuch which are being challenged. I don't know what the story is in South Africa, but I know in America and in England we have the challenges on what inyonim have to be taught in schools, etc. And we have our values, and those values are outside. And we have the option of no, don't really mean it, we're hiding it. No. If there are those inyonim of Torah which are dafka on the outside, we should leave them on the outside. And the Ummas Ha'olam should see those values, let them drink, sollen sie platzen, and they should absorb them. And mir soll sicher sein that by being firm in those inyonim of Yiddishkeit, which are on the outside, we should be firm and stand upright with them, and that should be the Aschalta de Geula and the Geula Hashlema with Moshiach Tzidkenu, the Mehed of Yomeinu Mamish.